Vandermark used the inside here to good effect to pick off Loris Baz there yesterday for fourth. Ducati versus Kawasaki into turn 7 last year. This is how it's done according to Motorland master Chaz Davies. Jonathan Rea forced to take the naturally wide racing line and moved aside. Rea made a move of his own there in race 1. Into the final sector now, a high-speed blast. The top performers clocked at over 320 kilometres per hour down the back straight. The biggest overtaking hotspot here in Aragon is into turn 16, as we saw from Scott Redding on Alex Lowe's yesterday. That's an area of excellence for the Ducati. Race lap record held by Alvaro Bautista from his season with the manufacturer. Good afternoon and welcome back to Northeast Spain for the final Superbike race of the weekend. After this one, we'll be halfway through the 2020 race programme and halfway through a 6-race schedule here at Motorland Aragon. The timesheets finely balanced in almost every session this season. Little to choose between our lead riders, and with so much testing, narrow gaps between the teams. Steve English alongside me. Could we expect any surprises here?
I think the one thing that's going to happen during this race is that we're going to see whether or not Chaz Davies from the second row of the grid is really able to carry forward the pace that he had in yesterday's race. Really impressive stuff from Davies in the second half of that race in particular, to make a big step forward, make himself very competitive to the other riders around him, and that's what we need to see from him from the second row of the grid. I'm really keen to see as well what happens with Alvaro Bautista in the Superpole race, the 10-lap race this morning. He was able to finish fourth, so he's going to start from the second row of the grid on the Honda. We know he's good on his tyres, we know he's very good around this Aragon circuit. Last year he was running a second a lap faster than anyone at different parts of the race, so he's going to be strong during this race, but this is the first time we've really seen the Honda able to get to the sharp end.
Let's take a look at the Superpole race results. Remember, the top 9 scoring points towards the championship and also earning their grid slot for this one, race 2. The front row will feature Jonathan Rea, Scott Redding and Michael Vandermark, the 3 podium men from this morning's action. Alvaro Bautista performing brilliantly, the best he's done on a Honda yet. He takes 4th position on the grid with Chaz Davies and Alex Lowe's alongside him. Then the third row will feature Toprak Razgatlioglu, Michael Ruben Rinaldi and Loris Baz. These are the riders who failed to score from that Superpole race, led by Leon Haslam. He was pretty disappointing in the end, and it's been a disastrous weekend all round for the BMW runners, Tom Sykes and Eugene Laverty.
Yeah, been a very tough weekend for Sykes. Obviously, we saw in the Superpole session a crash. In the Superpole race, we also saw him run off the track and collect Taddy Mercado. So unfortunately for Taddy Mercado, he ended up needing a little bit of attention as well on the side of the track. So for Tom Sykes, a little bit messy this morning, but let's see what he's able to do in race 2.
Yes, once again he will be starting from 14th position on the grid after a retirement in race 1 and a 15th position in the end after that incident in the Superpole race. And for his teammate Eugene Laverty, 2 16th place finishes, so a lot of work to do for both of those riders, but they'll be aiming to put points on the board here. Of course, the top 15 score in a feature-length race compared to only the top 9 in the Superpole race. Back up at the front, Jonathan Rea, victorious in the Superpole race, and commanding performance as well it was, that augurs pretty well for race 2.
Yeah, but Jonathan Rea's performance in the Superpole race really was impressive, because we know how fast Alvaro Bautista was here last year. Jonathan even faster than him during the course of that 10-lap race. That's actually a good indication of where Rea is right now, because last year's pace in the feature-length races was still a lot faster from Bautista. So when Jonathan has that clear track in front of him, he's obviously still able to spin those laps and have a really good pace.
We're going to see here a slow motion replay of Jonathan Rea making his way down into turn number 1 and didn't spend long behind Scott Redding in the Superpole race, but came up short in race number 1. So at least in terms of form in the feature length race, Redding will fancy his chances.
Yeah, for the feature length races, the Ducati still starts as the favourite. They've got more bullets in their belt than the Kawasaki, and certainly for Scott Redding, he made a big step forward yesterday. Had struggled in Friday's practice sessions. The team changed the gearing slightly. That's what allowed him a little bit more confidence, a little bit more speed, and made him make a big step forward yesterday's Superpole session.
Scott Redding's performances in Jerez, so 2 rounds ago, the second round of this 2020 season. First, second, first. could we be looking at a similar situation where he's just outgunned slightly in the Super Pole race, but when we come back for race number 2, he calms everything down and straight back out there to deliver?
Well, the one thing in the Super Pole races is that Jonathan Rea is a bit of a specialist in them. He's won 6 in a row, and he's able to use that extra grip, or not so much the extra grip, but just the fact that you don't have to care for the tyre as much. He's able to use that to really good effect and set really good pace.
Completing the front row of the grid here will be Michael van der Mark. 3rd position for him in the Super Pole race this morning, and that's the best job that he has ever done here in Aragon. As you can see on your screen, he's 5th in the championship on 100 points. He's actually tied with Chaz Davies on 100, and the pair of them 16 points from Toprak Razgatlioglu, who's had a disappointing weekend so far. So an opportunity for both riders to push forward in the standings.
Yeah, here's some of the progress from Michael van der Mark in this morning's Super Pole race. This is the move down the inside into turn 1 on Alex Lowe's, and for van der Mark, he was very decisive during this race, able to make his moves nice and cleanly. What was disappointing for him was once he got through into 2nd place, he was right there with Scott Redding until they went on to the long back straight, and suddenly he was never able to really get himself close again. So for Michael van der Mark, he knows that it's going to be a tough race, but he's got to do what he can to make sure he's able to keep himself in those podium fights.
4 top 5 finishes in the last 5 races for Michael van der Mark. He's scoring consistently. The problem for him is that he hasn't broken into the top 2 in any race so far in 2020. That's why he's got work to do. Meanwhile, the inconsistent Chaz Davies, his problem has been just the sheer variety in his results. You think back to Portimao, 11th place from race number 1. He finished pretty well in Portugal first time out, and he did a great job in race 1 here yesterday.
Yeah, the one thing for Chaz Davies is it's his qualifying that's causing the problems, because his pace in the races is always very impressive. He's always able to really set good consistent lap times. This was his move on the last corner of the Super Pole race to take 5th position from Alex Lowe's. And for Chaz Davies, if he's able to make a step with the qualifying tyre, give himself the chance of qualifying on the front 2 rows of the grid, he's suddenly got a chance of really being in the podium fight in every race. It's just getting more out of that qualifying tyre that's going to define whether or not he's able to have a successful season.
In front of both Lowe's and Davies in that shot coming off the final turn, Alvaro Bautista, who dominated the weekend here last season, of course, and Bautista, very strong performer earlier on, as we saw with 4th position in the Super Pole race. Unfortunately, the verdict after Tati Mercado's incident with Tom Sykes in the Super Pole race is that he is withdrawn from this afternoon's action, and hardly surprising, we're about to see it here.
Yeah, a bit messy here from Tom Sykes. You can see as he goes through the gravel trap, loses all grip, and he's just straight onto a collision course there for Tati Mercado, and Tati even getting hit in the face there by the wing from that Ducati as well. So just adding injury to insult injury there for Tati, but unfortunate to see him ruled out of action for this afternoon's race.
Completely and utterly the innocent party there.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing he could have done differently there. He's just very much the unlucky party.
So 22 riders on the grid then, as we see the man who I was just talking about a couple of moments ago, Alvaro Bautista, 4th position. The best result yet for HRC with Alvaro Bautista on board. And considering his teammate Leon Haslam finished down in 10th, that was a particularly strong result from the Spaniard. Yeah,
Bautista, he goes so well here at Aragon. We saw it last year on the Ducati. Obviously the Honda, a very different bike to that Ducati from last year, but for Bautista, he's still got good top speed. He's still able to manage that rear tyre really well. And we saw in the Super Pole race just what he could do over 10 laps. Now he needs to do it over 18.
It's all smiles for Michael Ruben Rinaldi. He's got a bit of a battle on to be top independent rider through this 2020 campaign. Loris Baz just 4 points behind him. Rinaldi tending to suffer slightly more perhaps in the 10-lap Super Pole race, but we know he's got the good longevity. We saw it last time out in Portimao. He always performed a couple of positions better over the course of the longer races.
Yeah, especially here in Aragon, that Ducati can come into its own, because the one thing about the Ducati is, right, it's very powerful. We know that. It's got good top speed, it's got good acceleration, but what actually sets it aside whenever you talk to the riders is actually just how soft the power delivery is, which means that it's not putting too much force through the rear tyre. That's why the Ducatis are able to manage that so well. If you think back to the end of the Super Pole race, we saw Rinaldi, the fastest man on the track for those final laps, so he's going to feel pretty confident going into an 18-lap race, particularly now that the temperatures are starting to rise. We've still got a big wind here at Aragon today, but it's now coming up to 21, 22 degrees, so it is heating up a little bit. bit.
Yeah, so watch out for the likes of Rinaldi in the second half of this race. He's sure to come on strong. He was 4th in race 1 here yesterday. How about Alex Lowe's? Challenging weekend for him after a crash in race 1. And obviously that's harmed him in terms of pure point scoring. Drops down to 6th position in the championship standings. That's the lowest he's been in the championship standings since Qatar 2018. So certainly Lowe's will be keen to make some progress here.
Yeah, and Lowe's pace in yesterday's race and those early laps was impressive. He was in that lead group. He was fighting with Jonathan Rea and the Ducati riders at the front of the field. So it was impressive from him in those early stages. Had a big crash, a strange crash as well, it's worth saying. But for Lowe's, he needs to recover from 6th place in this morning's Super Pole race and just try and come away with a decent finish again. If he's able to get himself into the podium fight, he'll be doing quite well, because we know that Chaz Davies is going to be strong. We know Scott Redding's going to be strong. The same will go for Jonathan Rea, and it's really a couple of question marks then about who's able to go with them, whether Bautista's able to go with them. Lowe's in yesterday's race certainly looked like he would have been able to go with them, but obviously after a big crash like that, you've had the wind knocked out of you, and the next day can feel a little bit of a strain.
Challenge for Chaz Davies here is to make sure that the start goes as per the plan, because if he finds himself stranded back down the order, we know he's got the pace to match Redding and Rea, but he hasn't necessarily got enough of a pace advantage to be able to come back at them in the second half of the race. We saw him get close, but not quite close enough. He's got to get a good getaway here, Davies.
Well, the one thing for Chaz is that he's at least going to be a lot closer to the front whenever he clears the pack. That's the one thing that yesterday left him with a lot of work to do around Aragon to be able to close down a couple of seconds to the 2 race leaders. But at least today, qualifying on the second row of the grid for race 2 gives him the opportunity to make a good start. If he's inside the top 3 or 4 positions on that first corner, he's going to have a great chance of winning this race. As it stands right now, he arguably starts the race as the favourite. That's how good his pace was at the end of yesterday's race.
Yes, we saw that from him setting the fastest lap of the race as well. Davies has got the speed in bagfuls, just needs to get away off the line, with Rea and Redding starting 1st and 2nd on the grid. And Bautista as well. I mentioned previously during the Super Pole race that Bautista was saying at the end of yesterday that actually it's in close combat that he really struggles in terms of pace on board that Honda, and that when he gets a bit of clear air, he's able to ride his own line, and that makes him that much more comfortable. He's certainly up higher on the grid than we've seen previously so far this weekend. Yeah,
the one thing about Bautista, we saw it last year as well, he's got a very unique riding style. If he's got that clear track in front of him where he's able to do what he wants, he can set very fast times, and that's been the case with the Honda as well. But the unfortunate reality is, whenever you're not leading the race, chances are you're going to be in traffic. So for Bautista, he's been bottled up at various times through the course of this season. Did very well in the Super Pole race, though, so it's worth saying just how good a job that was. But race 2 could be quite different. The one thing that's going to work in his favour, and you can see Bautista now coming to the grid, is that he's able to make good use of that rear tyre. We saw in each of the races so far this season, in the feature races, he's been able to come strong at the end of races. Yes,
so Bautista then, another of the men to watch in the latter stages, like Michael Ruben Rinaldi, who we mentioned, who will be starting from P8. A reminder of that front row of the grid then, it's Jonathan Rea who will line up alongside Scott Redding and Michael van der Mark. We ride on board with Jonathan Rea here. So far, I would suggest that this weekend has almost been mission accomplished. 3rd place, not what he would have expected from race 1. I'm sure he would have been looking for at very least the 2nd to limit the damage of a Scott Redding victory. But in the context of the championship as a whole, this was always supposed to be one of his weaker rounds.
Yeah, the one thing is, right now, as it stands, Rea is only 2 points behind Scott Redding, so he's doing a good job right now. The good thing for Jonathan is there's a new round being added to the end of the season. We're going to go to Estoril, a brand new track where experience of your bike makes a bigger difference than experience of the track. The teams aren't going to know full settings to use an Estoril. They're not going to go there with a big data bank of being able to immediately hit the ground running. We know the Ducati is a little bit more on a knife edge to find that right balance. The Kawasaki with a big operating window, that could be a big deciding factor by the time it gets to the end of the season. So for right now, Jonathan Rea, like you said, he needs to have that damage limitation, and he needs to just see exactly what he's able to do. Yesterday, he made a small mistake. He got punished for it.
What's interesting to consider in the context of the championship overall as well, Jonathan Rea 2 points behind Scott Redding. There's very little in it. After this race, we will be exactly halfway through this season, and we've not got any bizarre situations like we've had over the last campaign, for example, where Rea was miles behind and had to come back at it. This season, we've got 2 riders trading blows who are regularly on par with one another.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you want to see. You want to see a title fight where both riders are actually battling out on track with one another. other. We didn't tend to see that throughout last season. It was just one rider had the form at the start of the year, the other rider had the form in the second half of the year. And this season certainly looks like we've been able to see Scott Redding against Jonathan Rea and actually have to duke it out, and that's where you want to see the likes of Chaz Davies get into the fight today as well.
Jonathan Rea, we saw there from pole position, was third in race number 1 after making a turn 12 error and releasing Chaz Davies through into second place. But otherwise, up to that stage, they were running 1 and 2, this partnership or this pairing of Rea and Redding. Redding, the current championship leader, but as we've said, only by 2 points. First place in race 1, runner-up in the Super Pole race. He will be gunning for victory here. Nothing less than that will be considered a success, I would suggest, for Scott Redding. Completing our front row, Michael van der Mark, 5th in race number 1, matching his previous best around this circuit, and then a first ever podium here in Motorland Aragon in the Super Pole race to complete row 1.
Yeah, Van der Mark really impressive in that Super Pole race. Now he needs to build on that in the feature race. The good thing for Van der Mark is once he's in a battle, once he's in a race, he's always stronger than what some of his pace has been up to that point in the race weekend. So for Michael van der Mark, he's certainly going to try and be a cat amongst the pigeons in the early laps.
Yet another watch for the collection of Jonathan Rea.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we used to talk about Tom Sykes having a different house for his watches. Jonathan Rea is certainly going to be needing something similar. He's fairly been racking them up over the course of the last few years.
Yes, a house for the watches and another one for the trophies, of course. Row number 2 features Alvaro Bautista, Chaz Davies and Alex Lowe's. Bautista, who went down from a strong position actually in race number 1. He was well and truly in contention over the long race distance, and he did it over the 10 laps as well. So watch out for Bautista here. He's your spoiler.
I think for Bautista, the big thing is going to be what he's able to do once he's in that battle. I think that obviously he's able to use that rear tyre well. He's able to have good pace all the way through a race, but he just doesn't. I'm not sure if he has the same pace as those other riders outright, certainly not, but maybe at the end of the race it's going to come good for him.
Chaz Davies then lines up from P5, and Davies with second place in that race 1, but he had to come through the field to get it as well. So we know that he has got the capability to move swiftly through to the front and stay with Rea and Redding.
Yeah, and you could see Leon Camier there on the grid as well. He's been helping out Chaz Davies over the last couple of weeks, and always good whenever you've got a rider that knows the bike as well. Obviously Leon not as much experience as he would have wanted on the Ducati V4, but it's going to take a little bit of time for him just to really bring that across to Chaz Davies. Down on the grid, we've got Anthony Nelson with Phil Maher and the crew chief for this man, Toprak Razgadioglu.
Thanks, Steve. I've got Phil here. And Phil, we saw in the Super Pole race, we had a very good start from Toprak, but it has been a bit of a struggle this weekend for him. Why is it here at Motorland?
Yeah, we didn't hit the ground running even after the 2-day test. It wasn't a fantastic track for him last year, but we're starting to piece it together now and starting to give him a bike that he's happier with. We made some progress this morning in warm-up, gave him a better package. Super Pole race, he consumed a bit too much tyre too soon, and we paid the price for it in the later laps. That's something that could possibly happen to a lot of guys in this race too, so we hope to try and hang in there at the end of the race, which is something we didn't do yesterday. So fingers crossed.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
Continuing on then through the grid, we saw Toprak Razgadioglu, who will line up from P7, 6th place in race 1 and 7th in the Super Pole race. Alongside him here, Michael Ruben Rinaldi, 4th in race 1, 8th in the Super Pole race. As I said previously, he looked stronger over the longer race distance.
Yeah, Rinaldi able to really manage that tyre well. We heard from Phil down on the grid there saying about the tyre consumption being the key thing. I was speaking to some of the engineers earlier in the weekend about typically how much rubber does get used during the course of a race, and it's just a little bit under a kilo of rubber that ends up being used, so quite a lot. And if you're going through it a little bit too much, it's obviously going to have a big impact on what your lap times are going to be by the end of a race.
Yes, obviously people at home can only hear me and not see me, but I certainly raise my eyebrows there. That's a very impressive figure as we see the riders preparing now for race number 2, and just recovering Alex Lowe's, who as we said previously had that incident in race number 1 and failed to score. He was the championship leader in the early stages, but I think more realistically at this stage we're coming to the understanding that he's still got to really comprehend that KRT bike. Remember, it is his first season with that outfit.
Yeah, and we're seeing with Lowe's that it's just taking a bit of time to figure out a few different things with the bike. He obviously wants the bike quite different to what Jonathan Rea has, and sometimes takes teams and riders a little bit of time to adjust to getting a bike into a different window.
Back to row 3 and completing it behind Razgadioglu and Rinaldi, this man Loris Baz. Now, Baz in terms of single lap pace has been one of the front runners all weekend. He qualified well for race 1 and the Super Pole race, but could only manage 7th in race 1, dropped alarmingly backwards, and then exactly the same in the Super Pole race, all the way down to 9th.
Yeah, for Baz, coming from that front row, the grid really was a disappointment to drop down to 9th, but at least he was able to beat Leon Haslam to the flag, still give himself that 3rd row grid slot for race 2.
Row 4, Leon Haslam, Garrett Gerloff and Maximilian Scheib. Haslam's another rider who's dropped backwards in each of the races so far. 10th position, probably a fair reflection of where he's been this weekend. He starts there on the grid, and that's where he's finished each of the 2 races so far here in Aragon. Yeah,
and you've got to be able to make sure you're able to pick up points, but you've also got to make a step forward from each of the races. That's what Haslam's going to look to do.
Garrett Gerloff, who retired, of course, from race 1. He was running strongly, though, in that race. He'll probably have been a bit frustrated to only manage 13th in the Super Pole race, which leaves him trying to work his way back through from 11th. It had been a good Saturday all round from Super Pole and race 1.
Yeah, Gerloff's done a good job coming in as a rookie as well, obviously from the Moto America paddock. He's been able to come in and learn and evolve over the course of the season. That's what you have to do, and it's going to be interesting to see just how he continues to progress, especially going into next season if he's able to stay with that GRT team for his 2nd season.
Completing the 4th row of the grid will be Maximilian Scheib on the Kawasaki. He's another of the riders who retired from race 1, and likewise it was a shame for him because he too was running well in that opening salvo of the weekend. Only 14th position in the Super Pole race, but he was running strongly until that incident first time out.
Yeah, Scheib's actually done a pretty good job through the course of this season. Obviously Phillip Island was a big highlight for him, but some other races he's been able to give himself some decent results too.
So that completes the 4th row of the grid. A couple of big names in behind them, the likes of Tom Sykes, who will be going from P14, and Xavi Forés, who had a great weekend here last time he was in Aragon with World SBK. He took 8th position in race number 1, his best result of this season so far. 12th position in the Super Pole race for him. So it's Xavi Forés who lines up from P13. It's Tom Sykes and Federico Caricasulo alongside him, and for Sykes in particular, he will be aiming to make up for lost time really, because he had an incident in Super Pole. He retired from race 1. He had that drama in the Super Pole race. It's been like a catalogue of errors for BMW this weekend.
Yeah, I don't think it's easy to say exactly how bad a weekend they've been having. We've got Anthony back on the grid with Jonathan Ray as well.
Johnny, you've put yourself onto pole position once again, but what have you changed on the bike since race 1 yesterday?
The front tyre is the only difference, really. The rest of the bike's the same, so yeah, let's see what we can do these 18 laps.
Confident?
Cheers. So.
Thanks, Tony.
So. Well, he's not going to commit himself to being expected to win this race, but nonetheless, good to hear from Jonathan Ray just a couple of moments before we get underway with race number 2. The winner of our Super Pole race, who starts from pole position here today. He's got to get used to these battles with Scott Redding, not like in the past where we kind of at times knew who was going to win before we got underway.
Yeah, very different set of circumstances this year, and as Jonathan was clearly saying down there, he knows it's going to be